In 2016, a woman named Katie Plato reconnects with her biological parents after years apart. It should have been a good thing, and at first, that's exactly what it looks like. But not longer after reconnecting, something changes. Because Katie doesn't just rebuild a relationship with her biological father, she starts a romantic one. And within months, she's pregnant with his child. What started as a reunion has turned into something else entirely, something complicated and dangerous. Because just a short time after, Katie is dead. Her baby is dead. And the man who raised her, her adoptive father, is dead too. To understand how this story begins, you have to go back to 1995. Stephen Plato is 20 years old, living in New York, when he meets a 15-year-old girl named Alyssa online. She lives in San Antonio, Texas. They start exchanging messages, then letters, and before long, the relationship turns romantic. At one point, Stephen travels to Texas to see her in person, despite her parents not approving of the relationship. Not long after that, Alyssa becomes pregnant. At Stephen's urging, she leaves Texas and moves to Long Island to be with him. And at 17, she gives birth to a baby girl, and they name her Denise. But almost immediately, things start to fall apart. They're struggling with money. Alyssa later says Stephen can't hold down a job and he has a quick temper. Before long, she starts to worry about how he's treating the baby. She believes he may be physically abusive, so when Denise is about 8 months old, they make a decision. They put her up for adoption. Years later, Alyssa would say it was one of the hardest things she's ever done, but she felt like she had no other choice because, in her words, she wanted her daughter to live and to have a chance at a better life. And by all accounts, their daughter does have a good life, at least for a little while. She's adopted by Tony Fusco and his wife. They rename her Katie and raise her in Dover, New York. She grows up in a loving, stable home, and as she gets older, she starts thinking about college and a career in the creative arts, maybe advertising. Meanwhile, her biological parents, Stephen and Alyssa, move to Virginia, and they get married in 2006 and go on to have 2 more daughters. Years would pass. In January 2016, Katie turns 18. By this point, she knows she was adopted, so she decides to go look for her biological parents. Eventually, she finds them on social media and she reaches out. Messages turn into phone calls turn into visits. Katie's adoptive parents are a little uneasy about the new relationship, but they believe she's old enough to make her own decisions, so they support her. And then, just months later, in August of 2016, instead of starting college, Katie moves to Virginia to live with the Platos. But almost immediately, things inside the house are not stable. Alyssa and Stephen's marriage is falling apart. They're in the process of separating, and they're sleeping in different rooms. When Katie arrives, Alyssa tries to warn her. She tells her that when she was a baby, Stephen had been abusive, and one of the main reasons she gave her up was to protect her. But according to Alyssa, Katie doesn't seem concerned, and then very quickly, something starts to change. The relationship between Katie and Stephen begins to shift. At first, it's subtle, but the people around them notice. Stephen changes the way he looks. He starts wearing tighter clothes, shaving his beard, growing out his hair. And then about 6 weeks after Katie moves in, something happens that immediately raises alarms. One night, Stephen sleeps on the floor in Katie's room. Alyssa is disturbed by it, but the next night he does it again. This time she confronts him, and instead of explaining, he tells her it's none of her business. Then he leaves the house with Katie. About a month after that, Alyssa moves out. She and Stephen legally separate and begin sharing custody of their 2 younger daughters. Life is split between 2 homes, and for a while, things are tense but relatively quiet. Then in May of 2017, Alyssa discovers something that changes everything. She finds a journal. It belongs to one of her younger daughters that she shares custody with Stephen. She starts reading, and very quickly what she's reading doesn't make sense. Her daughter is writing something about happening inside of the house with Stephen and Katie. She writes, the 2 of them are in a relationship, that Katie is pregnant, and that Stephen has told their girls to start calling Katie their stepmother, not their sister. At this point, Alyssa says she completely breaks down. She calls Stephen and asks him straight up, "Is Katie pregnant with your baby?" He doesn't deny it. He just says, "I thought you knew. We're in love." Alyssa says she starts screaming and telling him he's sick, asking how he could do this. And then she hangs up and calls the police. Even as Alyssa reports this to the police and an investigation begins, the relationship between Stephen and Katie doesn't stop. If anything, it keeps moving forward. At this point, Stephen is still legally married to Alyssa, so while the investigation is unfolding, he's waiting for the divorce to be finalized. And once it is, he doesn't hesitate. On July 20th, 2017, just 2 months after the divorce is finalized, Stephen and Katie get married in Maryland. On the marriage application, they claim they are not related. The wedding goes ahead as planned. By this point, Katie's adoptive parents feel like there's nothing they can do to stop it, so they make the difficult decision to stay in Katie's life and try to support her. A few months later, in September, Katie gives birth to a baby boy and names him Bennett. Not long after that, the two move into a new home in North Carolina. Meanwhile, back in Virginia, the investigation is still moving forward. Police are building a criminal case because under Virginia law, a relationship between a father and a daughter is a felony and punishable by up to 10 years in prison. By the end of November, investigators have enough evidence to move forward. It takes almost 2 more months until late January of 2018 for police to track them down at their home in North Carolina. They're both arrested and extradited back to Virginia, charged with incest, and eventually released on bond. But there's a strict no contact order. They're not allowed to speak to each other at all. So they're separated. Katie goes back to New York to live with her adoptive parents, and Stephen's mother is given custody of the baby Bennett. For the first time in a long time, there's distance between them, and with that distance, something seems to shift. Katie appears to reconsider their relationship, and on April 11th, 2018, she breaks the no contact order. She calls Stephen and she tells him it's over. Police later believe that phone call changed everything. That same night, Stephen goes to his mother's house where baby Bennett has been staying. He tells his mom he's taking the baby home with him so he can Skype with Katie and so she can see him, but that's not what happens. Instead, investigators say Stephen takes Bennett home and suffocates him, then gets in his car and starts driving. It's nearly a 9-hour trip through the night. He knows exactly where he's going, to New York. He knows Katie's routine. Twice a week, every Tuesday and Thursday, she and her adoptive father, Tony, make the same drive. They go to Connecticut to visit Tony's mother, and on this day, Stephen is there waiting. In New Milford, Connecticut, they pull up to an intersection and then a car pulls up beside them. It's Stephen. And before they can react, he opens fire right into the truck. When it's over, Katie and Tony are both dead. Just minutes later, Stephen calls his mother and tells her everything. He says he kills the baby and left him at the house. He says he just shot Katie and Tony, and then he tells her he's going to kill himself next. The mother immediately calls 911. She's frantic, telling dispatch what Stephen just said, begging them to go to the house to check on Bennett, but it was already too late. When officers arrive, they find the baby dead inside. At the same time, nearly 600 miles away in Connecticut, police are searching for a vehicle tied to the shooting. Witnesses reported a minivan with North Carolina plates. Shortly after, police locate the vehicle. The engine is still running. When they approach the vehicle, they find 43-year-old Stephen Plato behind the wheel, dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. And just like that, it's over. 3 lives gone in a matter of seconds, all because of a relationship that should never have existed in the first place. Follow me for more stories like this and all things true crime.